Joseph Smith's fifth spiritual wife was Presendia Huntington. Her life is filled with tragedies, so trigger warning.
Presendia was Nina's older sister. She was born on September 7th of 1810 in New York. She was the fourth of 10 children.
Presendia left no diaries behind, and all that is left from her is a short autobiographical sketch and a few letters. Like Zina, Presendia was already married when Joseph took her as his spiritual wife.
Presendia was married to Norman on January 6th of 1827, when she was 16 years old. Norman was 22. Norman was a manufacturer, and Presendia was raised in a farming environment. Emmeline B. Wells wrote that she, Presendia, was inclined to be unhappy on account of it, though in a worldly point of view they were well off. In a letter dated January 22nd of 1829, Presendia's mother wrote to her own mother, saying, "Our oldest daughter was married, 1 year since her husband, and 2 brothers and sister, has experienced religion this fall, a great revival where they live. She has again been brought to enjoy religion."
Presendia had her first son at age 19, on December 12th of 1829. They named him George. Soon afterwards, Norman sold his machinery and business, purchased 100 acres of land in Jefferson County, New York, and built a house and a barn and cleared 70 acres. Presendia, now in her natural element, wove wool and flax, made feather beds from her own flock of geese, and milked her own cows. Now, of course, I don't know for sure, but this Norman guy sounds like a pretty great dude.
While on the farm, Presendia gave birth to a second son, Silas, who was born on Christmas Day in 1831, when she was 21. For 2 years, Presendia lived with her husband and 2 sons in peace and happiness, as a mother and farm wife.
This next part is a little triggering.
However, on November 13th of 1833, when Silas was just 2 years old, Presendia was boiling down cider in a very large brass kettle, and put it in an adjoining room where, unknown to her, Silas wandered in and accidentally fell into the kettle. One imagines the boy's screams, and Presendia frantically pulling him out of the boiling cider, then desperately trying to treat her wounded, disfigured child. She tended him for 13 hours as he suffered excruciating pain, but then died. For the first time, she experienced the agonizing grief of losing a child. "No one but a mother can realize the sorrow of an accidental death," she later wrote. After the death of Silas, Presendia's health declined and she underwent a difficult and painful pregnancy. As the birth of her third child drew closer, in the beginning of March of 1834, she became very ill, and Norman took her to see a doctor. She was too sick to return home, so she remained with Dr. Bagg. Presendia came very near death, and she bore her third son, Thomas Dimmick, on March 8th of 1834. Presendia survived childbirth, but unfortunately, Thomas did not.
Even before the age of 25, Presendia lost 2 of her 3 children.
Presendia was nursed back to health, but the memories and experiences in her farmhouse had taken a toll on her. Norman sold the farm and rented a woolen factory in Lorain, New York, resuming his favorite employment. It appears that while in Lorain, New York, different ministers in the area tried to recruit Presendia and Norman, but, Emmeline Wells stated, Mr. and Mrs. Buell believed that they were all wrong and stood aloof from all. In the summer of 1834, however, Presendia's mother came and visited her with a copy of the Book of Mormon. Presendia was taught about the word of wisdom, and felt it was true, and thought I would keep the word of wisdom and obtain the blessings promised. In the fall of that year, 2 elders proclaimed the new gospel in Presendia's childhood schoolhouse, and she and Norman were ready to be baptized.
At this time, Western fever was high and Norman was eager to go out west, but Presendia was eager to go to Kirtland. So the family sold their property, spent the winter in Sackett's Harbor, took a schooner across the Great Lakes to Ohio, and finally made it to Kirtland on May 1st. Again, Norman sounds like a pretty great dude. Anyway, Presendia was baptized on June 6th and Norman was baptized 3 days later.
On September 8th of 1836, Presendia had another child, Chauncey. He died in less than a month, on October 1st.
In 1838, Norman and Presendia traveled with George, who was now 10, to Missouri with the Saints. They arrived in Far West on March 13th.
On April 24th, Presendia gave birth to her first daughter, Adeline Elizabeth, who only lived 4 hours.
While in Missouri, Norman became disaffected from the church, and we don't really know why.
In an interview with Presendia, Emmeline Wells recorded, Mr. Buell, having apostatized from the church, was possessed of a very opposite spirit to that of his wife, who was strong in the faith and fervent in spirit. Sister Presendia prayed earnestly to the Lord for her companion, that he might return to the faith, but his mind had grown very dark, and it was useless to reason with or entreat him to see the error and doubt which had misled and confused him. Presendia's brother Oliver recorded that, during all this time, Norman Buell was in Clay County, saying God, Lord, and kind devil, for a time, referring to Norman's hesitation in leaving the church. But the time finally came that he must choose a side, so he chose the master that would give him the most money then, and in whose hands he thought he would be the safest. He even got to the point that he would not let his wife say a word in favor of her brethren, and would say all manner of evil of them himself.
Oliver implied that Norman left for fear of mob persecution, for financial security, and because he had specific complaints against church leaders. Wells wrote that he tried to persuade Presendia to leave the church, but she remained steadfast.
Presendia herself wrote that Norman left the church in Missouri in 1839. The Lord gave me strength to stand alone and keep the faith amid heavy persecution. Despite the now mixed faith marriage, they continued to live together.
Again, we don't know why Norman left the church, but there are a number of possibilities. Then, in December of 1841, Joseph approached Presendia's brother Dimmick Huntington and asked that he ask for Presendia's hand in secret polygamy. Dimmick then approached Presendia, and Presendia agreed. Joseph Smith actually offered Dimmick any reward he wanted for getting Presendia's hand in marriage. Dimmick's request was that where you and your father's family are, there I and my father's family may be also. Here again, we see Joseph's pattern of using a male intermediary. Often people in the church will cite Joseph Smith's sealing to women as a linkage to Joseph and his male friends. And they usually say that because of this, there's no reason for these polygamous unions to have any sex relations at all. Except that Joseph Smith sealing himself to men was practiced, which leaves no reason for him to have to marry women in order to be sealed or linked to these men. After Joseph Smith's death, Presendia left Norman without his consent or knowledge and took their son George with her. Just whoosh. She said she would rather suffer and die with the saints than to live in Babylon as she had once done before. Sorry, Norman. She ended up marrying Heber C. Kimball. Together they had 2 children, and their oldest daughter tragically drowned in City Creek when she was just 16 months old. She once joked with Heber C. Kimball that during her marriage to him, she had moved 20 times and was ready to be done.
In a brief sketch of her life written April 16th of 1881, when Presendia was 70 years old, she penned the following: "My testimony is I have never doubted the truth of the gospel, nor any portion as revealed from God by Joseph Smith. I have been in plural marriage 40 years. Considered it one of the purest principles ever revealed to man. I have never spoken one word against the principle of the gospel, but have tried to honor and sustain the cause to the best of my ability. These are my true feelings in the fear of God."